hope that's all right. I realize that one of the speakers later in the program is going to go a little bit more in depth into the challenges in Africa. So I'll keep things a little bit broad. I hope that's all right.
Yes,
That's good.
that's all right.
That's a speaker. I'm the speaker who will go into
That's you.
yeah, that's me. Ready to do anything. And I hope that we have an audience. Do we have an audience?
Yes, we do. We do. Actually, we'll
Two,
be.
two people, 10, 100.
I think we'll be over, I think 50 or 60. And then that's the people who have registered from, let's say, 3 weeks ago, no, 3 days ago. And then I hope during the webinar, because we'll be sharing also on YouTube, Twitter, and
Ah, okay.
LinkedIn. Yeah, so we
Mm.
hope many people will join us before the end of the webinar.
Welcome.
Blessing, you want to say something?
Hi,
Blessing,
everyone.
you're welcome.
Yes, thank you so much, Rafika. Hi, uh, Miss Meta. Lovely
Hello.
to meet you.
It's lovely to
Uh,
meet you too.
yes, so I guess welcome to today's webinar as we wait for the other panelists. But yes, lovely to hear this discussion that we're planning to have.
Who are we waiting for?
We are currently waiting for,
Oh, the doctor.
yes, Dr. Steve Akos as well as Mr. Nchiko.
And you have more than one gadget in the room, so there's a lot of echo. All right, we'll wait. And good to meet you, Jojo.
Good to meet you too, Professor.
Welcome.
Wait, fix this. Why can't I fix this?
Perhaps I can ask, I don't know how you plan to run the webinar. Do you want us to keep our video on, or do you want us to only have our video on when it's our presentation?
No, we want your videos on.
To keep it on. Okay.
Yes. And then also, we know you guys are expert in what you do, and we believe everything will be okay. So welcome. Actually, actually, this is our fourth and last webinar of this year.
Uh-huh.
So in Chico, you
Chico's here.
Hello. Hi. Hi, everyone. Hi, Prof. Hi, Jojo. Hi, Blessing.
Hello. Lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too as well. Very much looking forward to this.
Yes. So as we wait for Dr. Steve Akoth, once again, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Nabintu Anchiko Leticia. I am the coordinator of Faith and Environment. Like a bit of story, Faith and Environment is a project under Kabarak University Press. It started in 2021 under the lead of UNEP Faith for Earth. I think we know that program under UNEP. So our goals, especially this year, was welcome Dr. Steve.
Dr. Steve, welcome. You're muted.
It's from, are you able to say hello so we can hear that your audio is working?
Okay, my audio is working very well.
How are you?
Very well, Prof. How have you been?
Fine, I haven't seen you in 200 years. Welcome.
Thank you, but Prof, last time you promised me lunch. Now is the lunch hour. What are you going to do about it?
I will send via email some food.
Thank you, thank you.
Yes. So as I was saying, for the last 3 years, from 3 years now, we've been exploring how faith, religions, beliefs, especially African philosophy, can influence how climate change could be addressed. So this year we've been organizing webinar, and also we ran also a blog where we published all the conversation we have during the webinars and then also outside. It's run by students. We have students who publish with us, and then also experts like you, our panelists. So to get started, I would like each of you to present it, like to introduce ourselves, like what we do for life, where we work, our roles, and etc. Once each of us, like everyone has introduced ourselves, we will begin the webinar. And again, thank you so much thank you so much for your commitment today. And yeah, let's introduce ourselves. Since Dr. Steve came in the last one, so let's start with you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Steve Wayne. I am an anthropologist by primary training.
I have to say, Doctor, your voice is not very clear. I wonder if there is something with your microphone that you can adjust.
Okay, is that better now?
Yes.
Yeah, the problem also is that I haven't had lunch. So, I'm only using the most of energy available. But thank you. Yeah, so I'm Steve O'Marcos. I'm an anthropologist for training, but I'm covering in law. So in law, I'm covering primary discipline of anthropology. And I teach at Kenyatta University and Tengaza University. I'm also the national vice chair committee appointed by the Chief Justice to implement alternative justice systems in Kenya. Thank you.
Sorry, you were on mute, but I think you meant me.
Yes, yes.
So I'm Jojo Mehta. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Stop Ecocide International. We're an international organization working really on two levels, on the diplomatic and political level in terms of advising and briefing and supporting, but also on the civil society communicational level, tracking and amplifying and reporting on developments around ecocide law. So we focus very specifically on the criminalization of the worst harms to nature. And yeah, we work in on those sort of two levels, but very much all around the world. So a very broad remit, but with a very specific focus.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Prof. Kariuki.
Very well. My name is Kariuki Muigwa, advocate of the High Court of Kenya. But I'm also a teacher at the University of Nairobi, a place called KISLAP, Center for Advanced Studies in Environmental Law and Policy. I also teach at the Wangari Maathai Institute. So I not only teach law, I teach environmental governance itself. I represent Kenya at The Hague, but not the criminal side, Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague. So these debates, I hear them from very close range. I have sat for a long time in the National Environment Tribunal. Very importantly, I'm a writer. So I consider myself a teacher across all the universities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chico.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My internet is not very stable, and there is some noise in the background, but I hope it's going to disappear very soon. Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Nchiko Wanchiko. I'm somehow really happy to have received an invite by Nabintu. she's been avoiding me in this faith and environment project. She was saying it's going to look like a family thing. She doesn't want the brother to come and interfere with project. So I work for Amnesty International and I advise on climate justice in East and Southern Africa. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. So basically the topic is really of interest to me because part of the movement behind Ecocide was informed about the because of the climate crisis. So it really is of so much interest to me. Yeah, and other than that, I'm also, I think, a student in so many ways and really, really looking forward to learning from every one of you.
Thank you so much, Arnold. Blessing.
Hi everyone. I hope I was able to rid myself of the echo that was there before. Either way, my name is Esther Blessing Nasimiu. I am a student at Kabarak Law School. I am also an editor in charge of peer review for the Kabarak Law Review, which is a student-run journal, and I'm also the student commissioner for the African Society of International Law, and I will be moderating this session. So happy to see everyone.
Okay, thank you so much. So we are going to start the webinar. We are going live, and also please, all panelists, keep your video on so we could easily relate with the audience. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Blessing. Are we on live?
Thank you. Yes, I believe we are.
Yes, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Nabintu. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Uniting Faith and Law, an African perspective on ecocide and environmental protection. I should note that this happens to be the last webinar, the fourth and final for this year's session rounds. And as we start, I would like to invite Andrew Muri for a devotional thought. Welcome, Andrew Muri. Okay, seemingly Andrew is not around, so I will go ahead and pray. Let's believe and pray. Our Heavenly Father, we come before you this afternoon. We thank you for this session. Thank you for the far we have come as a faith and environment. As we start this session, we pray that, Lord, may you be with us, may you guide us, may you help us champion a wonderful conversation, Lord, that is both enriching and insightful. And at the end of the day, we shall give glory unto your name. And it is in the mighty name of Jesus I have prayed and believed. Amen. Okay, then. Let's proceed. So, our first speaker today is Jojo Meta. She's the co-founder and executive director at Stop Ecocide International. She's also the chair, Stop Ecocide, and convener of the independent expert panel for the legal definition of ecocide. She is a writer, a speaker, and advocate of earth activism, various co-organizer as well of Frack Free 5 Valleys, hope I've said it well, and a designer at Side Street Design, among others. She is also a graduate of Oxford and London universities and has a background in communication, entrepreneurship, and on-the-ground environmental campaigning. So in her opening remarks, she will essentially highlight what challenges do does she foresee when it comes to establishing ecocide as a prosecutable crime across African nations? And further, she will highlight in what ways African spiritual and cultural beliefs can bolster the ecocide movement's legitimacy and impact. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much. And it's a real pleasure to be with you. I will also give something of an overview of the rationale and the progress around ecocide law as it develops around the world. So it's going to be a little bit of a broad overview. So distinguished guests, colleagues, panelists, and friends, it is an honor and pleasure to be with you today for this important discussion. Ecocide is a powerful term and a powerful concept. It comes from the Greek and Latin, oikos, home, and kedere, to kill. So ecocide means to kill one's home. And it's a way of aptly describing what is happening on our planet at the moment. Our organization, Stop Ecocide International, works both at diplomatic level and across civil society to support the establishment of the recognition of ecocide, severe and widespread or long-term harm to nature, as a serious crime. Progress has been rapid in recent years, indicating that it is a concept whose time has now come. Consideration and adoption of ecocide laws is progressing around the world at national, regional, and international levels. The EU has earlier this year adopted a directive that will address some conduct comparable to ecocide, which is the first time that this term has been used in EU law. And there is now a proposal on the table at the International Criminal Court, the ICC, to include ecocide as a standalone crime in the Rome Statute, the governing document of that court. And that proposal has been made by 3 Pacific Ocean states, Vanuatu, Fiji, and Samoa. And the core of the definition that is proposed is very succinct and bears repeating here. Ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. Now, recently, as of last month, the Democratic Republic of Congo is publicly supporting this proposal, which means that the diplomatic conversation in Africa has now been set in motion as well. Why is a crime of ecocide required, you may ask? And there are, of course, many environmental laws already in place around the world, but as we are painfully aware, they're often poorly followed. Most environmental laws sit in the regulatory sphere, and there is no real stigma attached to breaching regulations. It can often be cheaper to compensate when caught than to lose profits. And vital ecosystems and local populations usually pay the high price. Ecocide law, however, is about naming the very worst harms as crimes, usually on a major industrial scale or impacting a wide area. The intention is to ensure that economic activity remains within safe limits. And this is of fundamental importance, especially where environmental harms and human rights violations are closely intertwined, as is frequently the case in resource-rich regions such as Africa. Detailed scientific knowledge of risks to nature, climate, and people in specific contexts is, of course, complex, but it is extensive and it is growing. New technologies, such as satellite imaging, create key supplementary forms of evidence which are increasingly being accepted in legal contexts. So ignorance of collateral damage from dangerous activity is therefore no longer easy to claim. And importantly, this fast-growing knowledge base is available to decision makers at the highest levels of policy and industry. Criminalization of ecocide creates enforceable and personal accountability for precisely these key decision makers, so that where there is a threat of severe and either widespread or long-term damage, the dangers will have to be better researched and taken very seriously. Appropriate safety protocols are more likely to be employed, or alternative approaches developed in order to protect nature, climate, and people. And of course, and this is the key deterrent point, in order to avoid personal criminal liability. Criminal law is such a particularly powerful systemic lever because it speaks to what as a society we consider unacceptable. Now, while there are, of course, challenges to establishing new legislation anywhere in the world, we have found that with ecocide law, resistance mostly distills to three things. Firstly, a simple lack of information and understanding, which we approach by communication, whether that be in the form of high-level briefings, media coverage, or legal, academic, and cross-sector civil society discussion, including precisely the kind of event we are engaging in today. Secondly, definitional concerns, many of which are resolved with a deep dive into the definition being proposed at the ICC, and we can, of course, discuss this more deeply in the Q&A if this is helpful. And thirdly, and perhaps less visibly, entangled special interests. And these, we have found, can best be avoided by an inclusive and non-judgmental presentation of the law, and by keeping the discussion as public as possible, since such entanglements tend to thrive away from public scrutiny. On the whole, there is no major objection to the law in principle. We passed the point, we believe, quite a while back, where any government will be willing to be seen objecting directly to this initiative. Indeed, it is very hard to argue that the most severe environmental harms should not be considered serious crimes. In Africa, there is sometimes a particular need to address concerns around the ICC and its focus and effectiveness, but also in Africa there are a number of benefits that may usefully be taken into account in this regard. Firstly, ecocide law can provide defense and recourse against predatory foreign corporate entities who come in with investment but leave environmental disaster, as has tragically been the long-term situation in the Niger Delta, for example. Secondly, the rebalancing of international criminal law to apply to global North decision makers rather than on-the-ground local companies or workers, since international crimes are directed at those in superior responsibility in a given context. In other words, those at the top of the supply chain. Thirdly, in the context of the definition that has been proposed at the ICC, respect for the right to development is baked into the definition. Acts must be unlawful or wanton, which is to say that damage must be disproportionate to the social and economic benefits anticipated. And this relates to what is actually dangerous environmentally, rather than punishing needed developments where these are carefully, lawfully, and properly managed as they should be. Legislators do need to feel safe to engage with this topic, to know that there is an established conversation, as well as appetite amongst the public. And in this context, spiritual and cultural beliefs will, we believe, play a significant role. All text-based faiths, including Muslim and Christian belief structures most prevalent on the African continent, convey creation as the expression of the divine and the care of creation as a human duty. There are also a number of elements present in African spiritual and indigenous traditions that we believe would strengthen the legitimacy of the movement to recognize ecocide in the region. Reverence for nature is key. Many African cultures hold deep spiritual beliefs emphasizing the interconnectedness of humans and nature. Indeed, we would argue that the absence in our global economic culture of this sense of interconnectedness is actually at the root of the current ecological crisis. So framing ecocide as an offense against this sacred connection could perhaps resonate deeply and inspire communities to support. Then there is traditional ecological knowledge. African communities possess a wealth of traditional ecological knowledge that can contribute to sustainable practices and to conservation efforts, and in the context of ecocide law, could provide the evidence and knowledge base to help decision makers understand the risks and hazards to ecosystems in a given territory. Also, framing ecocide as a crime against future generations is also relevant, as it is also my understanding that the principle of intergenerational responsibility is deeply rooted in many African cultures. Moreover, Africa as a region has a relatively young population. Ecocide law has a particularly powerful resonance for youth, as it speaks to the livability and safety of their future, to protecting the world into which they are growing up to live and work. But perhaps the most powerful resonance for me when talking of ecocide law in the context of traditional spiritual cultures is the way this law will reflect a universal truth that is deeply recognized by those cultures the world over. It's the truth that we have a reciprocal relationship with nature. So when we severely damage the earth, there are consequences. This is a simple fact, and it is time that our legal systems expressed it for the safety and for the survival of all of us. Thank you so much. I look forward to the rest of today's discussions.
Thank you so much as well, Ms. Jojo Mehta. Secondly, we shall proceed with Dr. Steve Akoth. He is an anthropological research and customary and informal justice expert and a scholar. He is also a senior lecturer at Kenyatta University and Tengaza University College, and he is a graduate from the University of the Western Cape. Today, he will be addressing how legal recognition of ecocide enhances indigenous land rights and cultural preservation. Welcome, Dr. Akoth.
Thank you very much. I've switched my discussion a little bit, and I would like to do a PowerPoint presentation. Is it possible to activate it for me?
Dr. Akoth, we are having trouble hearing you clearly.
Okay, I got it. Is that better now?
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Okay, can I get the PowerPoint permission?
All right.
I would like to do a PowerPoint, and I need authorization to turn on.
Yes, that's all right.
Okay, so I've switched my presentation a bit to focus on a conceptualization that I think follows very closely with what Jojo has presented. Jojo has presented the question of criminal law as ecocide. I want to present on the question of justice and what we draw from the relative justice system kind of approach. Jojo, are you struggling to hear me? You can hear me better now? I can see from your face if you're struggling to hear me.
So I'm finding it that your microphone is perhaps not hugely clear. Perhaps if you come closer to the microphone, it might make a difference.
Yeah, sorry, is that better?
Yes, it is a bit better. I think if you're a little bit closer, it helps.
Okay. And I also had to put on this bad earphones to clear the noise because where I am, there's a bit of noise. So if I remove them, it will be noisy and it will be clear. So should I remove them or I keep the earphones? Chair.
I don't think the earphones will make so much of a difference. I think it's the microphone.
Okay. So I haven't got permission to share my work yet. I want to look at ecosystem approach to justice and its implications for advancing environmental conservation. And my argument is that if we were to rethink the justice approach in a way that decolonizes, we will get a better opportunity perhaps to deal with some of the challenges that confront us today. So I work, and we learn a lot from Professor Karaoke work. I work on alternative justice system questions. Now, that work comes from two propositions. The first proposition is a call to decolonize the legal framework and appreciate multiple doors to justice. The second motivation in that approach is to suggest that there exist multiple universes for accessing justice. And this is very important. So decolonizing is important because if you go back to the historical trajectory that Georgia is giving, and I also teach sustainable development, our current problem of climate change normally is framed from the 1850s industrial revolution problem. And that the industrial revolution ventures and entrepreneurs at the time, operated within a Christian biblical treatise. I always say wrong interpretation that when man and woman was brought to the world, conquer and to control are not quite to be custodial. So that you see that the culture, the framework of so-called development at the time and subsequent developmental inventions have been largely what we call anthropocentric. And the anthropocentric development approach, which you see in the Industrial Revolution, which you see in the mining. If you look at mining in South Africa, mining in Zambia, mining in Australia, you see this anthropocentric approach has ended up, therefore, depredating and killing flora and fauna. However, you must remember that that has been possible because there has been a legal regime that seems to have supported that very notion of so-called development. So therefore, when we confront the question of ecocide today, we must start by asking ourselves, what logic of development do we need that can move beyond the anthropocentric proposition? And the anthropocentric proposition, in my view, has got supporting foundational philosophies in Christianity, and as you very well know, common law has a huge footprint from the Christian theological moral logic. Now, the question is there another logic? And the answer is yes. Alternative justice systems operate from the framework that there exists other logics of looking at justice. That it starts by asking us to redefine justice. We look at justice not from the Hobbesian thinking where justice, as defined also by Raoul, is that which exists because the state exists. So that access to justice, for example, if you look at Article 48 of the Constitution, it seems sometimes to suggest that access to justice being an obligation that the state is supposed to ensure that it's fulfilled, then we need a leviathan for us to access justice. Now, that is not the whole story. We say the whole story, if you look at Article 48, has got both access to institutions of justice, like the court and tribunals, but also the ability of people to choose, to utilize their capability, to utilize their cultural resources in realizing that which is justice. So that if you read Article 48 in that form, one will ask themselves, whose justice? Whose justice? And if you pose the question, whose justice, then you can say environmental justice, you can say individual justice, you can say collective justice, and so on. Take an example of River Ganga in India. River Ganga in India, which I use a lot to teach my students on sustainable development, is not just an aquatic phenomenon. It is a source of spirituality. It is a source of renewal. It is a signifier in identification, and so on. And that's why, after many years of its dilapidation, now there's a movement which is pushed forward by the Hindus, who are the major users of the Ganga, and the various national communities. Come back to Kenya. Professor Karioki will tell you that when we were building the expressway in Nairobi, there was the case of the fig tree in Westland. The fig tree is also called the Mugumu tree among the Gikuyu. So the road construction company, Kenha, wanted to uproot the tree. But then there was a question, who will uproot the tree? And the Gikuyu staff members at Kenha said, me, I can't touch it because this has spiritual significance to us. And ultimately, the engineers, most of them being Chinese, said, well, if nobody wants to touch it, we can't touch it. And the fig tree was saved because it has a certain signification. If you go to Kakamega, the reason why the Kakamega forest has survived so far, as opposed to Mau forest in Rift Valley, is because most of the trees in Kakamega forest are indigenous trees, which have got spiritual value among the locals. And that therefore meant that cutting the tree would have implications in terms of spirituality, in terms of identification, and people thought there would be unexplained consequences. Now, this is a framework not only of understanding the environment, but it's also a framework of justice. In the alternative justice system logic, we have suggested that there are three typologies. One is the one we call autonomous justice system, which is often intermingled between the people, their environment, their history, and the idea of the future. Then we have got autonomous third party, where a third party, be it state or non-state, works with an autonomous group to pursue justice by taking into account that topographical infrastructure that I talked about. And the third typology that we have is the court annex AJS mechanism, where courts work with the autonomous system to be able to promote justice. I want to give you one example of how how a court annex worked recently. There was another road being built in Mombasa, connecting Dongokundu and Mombasa Island. That road was going to clear three kaya forests. A kaya forest is a forest which is a source of spirituality by a particular group among the Mijikenda. Mijikendas are 9 language groups, and each group has got a kaya. So the National Land Commission had recommended that let the elders be compensated and let the forest be cleared. When the matter went to Land and Environmental Court in Mombasa, the elders who were protesting and therefore filed against the intended eviction and acquisition of the forest, ultimately saw to have the matter decided out of court. And so they took the National Land Commission to what they call the protocol, what the forest meant, and the reason why it was impossible to compensate for the total cost of the forest. Ultimately, they were able to convince the court that the claims that they had put forward, although not justiciable, were solid enough to save the forest. And that is how an AJS system, because elders are part of the dispute resolution system among the Mijikenda, was able to work with the court to be able to solve the matter and save the forest. So you see, the idea here, therefore, is if you look at justice beyond, and even law, beyond justiciability, and look at the various universes of justice that exist, it is therefore, it will become possible to move away from the anthropocentric idea of law, which has contributed significantly to diminishing of flora and fauna. The last point I want to make is that in so doing, one of the things that our committee has done is to create a nexus between the current movement in the SDGs. SDG 16.3 talks about people-centered justice. The question is, who are the people? The way you define a person in the classical English jurisprudence is the atomized person. In fact, the idea of human rights often as a person as an atomized individual. But a person in Africa, in Kenya, in Congo, is the whole embodiment of ecosystem. If you look at my name, Akot, I'm named Akot because I am from the family of rainmakers. And we as rainmakers, we believe that we cannot make rain if we don't have an environment that can accommodate birds. And because we need birds to do our business as rainmakers, we need vegetation. And we need multiple types of birds. Some can perch on bushes and shrubs, but others need a fairly bigger canopy. And therefore, if we come to our art of rainmaking, it goes hand in hand with having forests. So the person Akot is not just the atomized individual. So if you look at the blueprint of the Chief Justice, titled Social Transformation through Access to Justice, we have helped the Office of the Chief Justice to define the people targeted in 15.3 SDG as this holistic embodiment of the person and their environment. And that shift is very important, not only in reimagining the idea of justice, but also creating a persona that moves beyond the individualized anthropocentric idea of justice, of development, and of a person, which then helps us to not only think futuristically, but also look at the world as a place that accommodates the human and all others with whom we cohabit in the world. And that's the idea of justice that we want to continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akot, for that concise conversation. Up next, we have Prof. Kariuki Mwigua. He is a chartered arbitrator and professor, Faculty of Law at UON. He is also a senior partner at Kariuki Mwigua and Company Advocates, and he is a writer. He will explain to us how feasible it is to integrate ecocide law within existing African legal systems, given the influence of political interests, extractive industries, and deforestation that drive African economies. Welcome, Prof. Mwigua.
Good afternoon. Jojo, I agree with you 100%. If you're looking for someone to advocate for the passing of the Ecocide law, I am there. And I've put it down in 2 papers. Even for this presentation, I have written a paper called Examining African Perspectives on Ecocide and Environmental Protection. Admin just share with everyone that paper. It takes the view that ecocide law should be adopted here. It should be recognized as the 5th crime, and we should move like yesterday to join that process. Dr. Steve Akot and I have worked in another area that I'm interested in. What do the locals think? What do the Africans think? Did they have a system before Stockholm 1971? And yes, they've had a system that respected nature. And it's not just in Africa. I was in India the other day, spent a bit of time. I was telling you, Jojo. And one of the things that I found interesting is that in the place I was in, instead of a donkey, they would have an elephant with both tusks. And nobody is killing the elephant. Nobody is chasing it. And then moved from there, went to China. And I found people keep tigers at home. But in Kenya, we need a law to safeguard those animals. So why is it that these people are able to live in harmony with nature? And I agree with Dr. Steve Akot that it's a different system that we must not ignore, even for a minute. I did say earlier on that I teach environmental governance, which is very different from environmental law. They merge at one point, but my argument has always been that if you're looking at a law or to introduce a law, you must do it within a context of PESTEL, political, economic, social, technological, ecological, and legal. So that you must look at the political circumstances surrounding whatever you are looking at. You must look at the economics of it. And you must ask yourself, what does the society say about this? Maybe you don't need a law. You just need to tap into what the society believes in. In Madagascar, in the middle of, in Mauritius itself, in the middle of Mauritius, sorry, there's a lake that is very clean and there's no law around it at all. It's just a holy lake for them. Everybody believes it's holy and you can drink water from it. Why is it that you don't need law to conserve that lake? So in matters conservation, you must ask, what do the people believe in? Right? The other day, the Pope wrote a book. It's called Laudato Si. And he argues that the earth was given to us to take care of. So he's actually adopting what many systems believe in, many communities believe in, that the earth is an inheritance. So what I'm saying, Giorgio, as we push ecocide as a crime, we must ask ourselves, what is the impact of law on the society? The effect of law on social change. I know there is a gentleman called Roscoe Pound. He says law is a tool of social engineering. But to what extent does it work? And I'll give you an example. About 100 years ago, across Africa, you'd find clean rivers, forests, very little degradation, 100 years ago. But 100 laws later, because, for example, a quarter of Kenya's laws, a whole quarter is about the environment. The place is degraded. So what is the impact of law on society, even as we use it as a tool? And environmental governance insists that we must look at other elements like economic instruments. For example, is there an incentive? You give people an incentive to conserve the environment. We must look at science and technology. If a place is polluted, for example, a river, it doesn't help to make too many laws around it. You can clean it up with chlorine or some other substance. We must look at the norms. What do the people believe in? And an example was given earlier about uprooting that very sacred tree. Okay, I was in Australia the other day, and before the pilot lands the plane, he acknowledges that the earth is being taken care of for the present and future generations. I found that very weird, 2-3 times across Australia, because they have agreed with the locals that you don't just go build a road across it. The land is for the past, present, and future generations. And even as we push ecocide, we must ask those people, what do you believe in? And those who believe that we should look after the unborn have something to say. Let us have their voice inside there. And you've heard something about ecocentrism and anthropocentrism. One mistake we made with the Rio Declaration is to make it very anthropocentric, development for people. But what about nature? And I think the DRC Congo were right again because they introduced the Earth Charter for Nature, which is ecocentric. So there must be that balance of anthropocentrism and ecocentrism and spiritualism and the norms and what is called environmental ethics. And where do you find that? In the culture of people, the religions, the various religions, and not just religions, their own ethics that we might not even know around. I visited Papua New Guinea, and they have 1,000 tribes. And before you even make formal law, you must ask them, what do you believe in? They believe in conservation, not just cutting down trees. The forests have a meaning to them. So as we go on thinking about ecocide, defining it, we must relate it to what the people believe in. Because at the end of the day, even when we have a good law, it must be obeyed. We must relate it to technology. What is it we can do to clean up the environment, or to do what is called risk reduction, predict risk very scientifically, assess the environment itself through environmental impact assessment and environmental audits and surveys, so we know exactly what we are talking about. But one of the reasons I am for the ecocide recognition as a fifth crime is nobody wants to be caught. And for the multinationals, they don't want their names they don't want to look bad at all. In fact, a lot of them do what is called greenwashing, trying to show how good they are at the international level. The oil companies will have windmills and a lot of green in their promotional material, just to show they are not polluting. So Ecocide will get these people out. And it does help to have a law that we can refer to, not just a belief, because the beliefs are not uniform. It will help to have a law that can bite, a law that can be used to prosecute people and also foster damages or get damages for the communities affected. So it will be a law that can bite. And away from the international law itself, at the local level, we must also strengthen the legal framework so that it also bites and it can protect the people. So you can see then, my point then, and it has been made by both of you, is that we must incorporate all those norms, all those other non-legal mechanisms for making sure that the environment is clean. There has been a recognition from Stockholm to Rio to the Paris Agreement of how we must maintain the earth for the present and future generations. This has culminated in something called ESG, environment, social, and governance. Put differently, sustainability, the whole idea of sustainability. And this is just one more step to ensure sustainability, especially for indigenous people, vulnerable people, and so on. We are saying to the big companies, you must have sustainable and ethical and responsible practices. And here is the framework. And then we give them the framework within law, and not just local law, international law, where we can get them. And we also make it very expensive for them to pollute. We have the polluter pays principle and some other good well-sounding principles. They must begin to work. The most abused is the polluter pays principle, because we find these companies and they just pay quickly. We must make it difficult for them to operate and to operate beyond what is required of them, and that is to take care of the environment, to take care of the present and future generations as they do their resource extraction. We must help them do their balance sheets differently, so that we must take into account of the thing you took from the environment. You had clean water, now it's dirty. And then that money can, within a legal framework, go back to those societies. So you can see why I'm agreeing with both of you. But you must go beyond law to govern the environment, to those other things. Because we are thinking at the background, what is the ideal sustainable development for those people? Can it happen with all that pollution and extraction and spoiling of the environment? No, it can't happen. The degradation must be addressed legally. The deforestation must be addressed legally. Biodiversity loss must be addressed legally and also scientifically. Pollution and climate change must be addressed legally. And everybody must be on the table, including those from Africa. I read somewhere today that the people who've gone to the conference that is going on now in Baku, some of them cannot afford lunch. And I laughed. I said, look, what is this? Everybody must be at the table equally, and their voice must be heard. And Africa is unique because it has very many natural resource-based conflicts all the time. This law then must come in and fit in its place to build peace and security, what is called environmental security, because environmental crimes in Africa are increasing, from poaching to all the others. So protecting the environment is necessary for sustainable development. Criminalizing ecocide gives us a practical tool that can be used for environmental protection in Africa. So it will be a legal and moral impetus placed upon those companies to protect the environment, and prosecuting environmental crimes for those multinational entities is a deterrent and a strong one. Nobody wants to be prosecuted that way. And we are thinking about the ICC. Yes, it has its own shortcomings, but nobody wants to be dragged to the Hague, as we call it. Nobody, especially at a personal level. And I think environmental law has grown to such an extent that now we look at personal liability, even if you're a director of a company hidden somewhere. So the local communities in Africa can be helped to protect the environment. This by such a law. And do not forget, as I sum up, that these local communities have been at the heart of environmental conservation for centuries and centuries, and they were able to do it. They will be able, using this law, to challenge destructive practices in court, very similar to what has been happening in Australia and New Zealand. They were able to challenge certain things in court, Mabel versus Queensland, and so on. And they would also be able to showcase within that framework their own indigenous and traditional knowledge that has conserved the environment for a very long time. A word of caution is that this is not a panacea. The adoption of this law is not a cure-all. We must have the norms that have always been used to govern the environment. Traditional knowledge must be enhanced and mainstreamed. Environmental ethics must be identified and also mainstreamed into this law as well. Awareness, and a lot of education, environmental education is important. The Africa Union should come in and do something about it so that we are developing what I see as continental guidelines. You see, the European Union is already doing something. What about the Africa Union and the regional bodies? Can they adopt something very similar, but not Eurocentric, Africa-centric? So that might work. So that as we make national constitutions, national statutes, they take into account the norms of their people, so that enforcement will not be a problem. I haven't seen a Kenyan or an African walking around with a statute in the street. They're reading it. They don't. But there's a way they live. Can we make sure they live that way, but within an environment where they protect the environment? Can we make sure that whatever they do can spur effective environmental protection and sustainable development? Within the Kenyan context, this is already happening. I read somewhere that the Turukana people have taken a certain company, which I will not name, to court for ecocide. That's the first time I saw it in Kenya. Fine, even if we don't have a complete crime called ecocide, it's a bunch of allegations against that company. And that company is not very happy about that suit. Not because they'll win, they may win or not, but the exposure is very dangerous for them. They are not very happy, and they may end up settling that matter. Let me leave it there, because I can see the room is full. I'm here to engage. We are here to engage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Migwa, for giving us a practical setting. Up next is Mr. Nchiko Nchiko. He is a climate advisor at Amnesty International, and he also holds an LLM from Geneva Graduate Institute and National University Singapore. So Mr. Nchiko will be addressing us on a case study of ecocide in Madagascar. And just before he starts speaking, maybe to the audience, in case you have any questions, please type them in the chat. Thank you. And welcome, Mr. Nchiko.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Blessings, for that kind introduction. And really, thank you very much to our panelists. It's been so much learning so far. So maybe just before I go into the small case study about Madagascar, I can just also like share some thoughts on this topic of ecocide. Yeah, so I have just a few points to make. So far, when we look at where we are at with the conversations on this subject, the focus seems to be more on individual culpability. And what this seems to be doing is to make states and international community to overlook the structures that have been leading to damage to nature. And these structures, we see them in international trade law. We see them in international investment law, where we have a lot of economic coercion. And even when we think of making it expensive for corporate actors to damage the environment, for example, we really remember that now we have joint ventures between like corporate actors and African states. And many a times we see that corporations are assigning the burden of risks, the heavier burden of risk on African states, on particular individuals in the government of our state. And then again, even when it comes to the bargaining position of African state within those particular transactions that actually lead to environmental degradation, we'll see then again that we are in a weaker position. So one element is that the conversation is really leaving out the structures that allow for economic coercion and that lead actually to environmental degradation. Trade, investment, we can really think about that. The other element to mention perhaps is to just see that we are pushing for these conversations within the same structures that have not worked for Africa and African people when it comes to international criminal justice. And this is a point that Prof. Kariuki did allude to. So the suggestion of adding this particular crime as a standalone crime within the framework of international criminal justice should really just make us remember the way international criminal justice, particularly the ICC, has been very selective in its prosecutions, targeting African leaders. And we are not really sure that that is going to change when we include this particular crime as a standalone crime within the frameworks that we have in place right now. The other element is just the place of the UN Security Council in the conversation. Are they going to prosecute themselves? Because again, they are somehow empowered to prosecute other people, but are they going to prosecute themselves? Is the US going to prosecute its people when it comes to this particular crime? Will China do that? Will France do that? These are just like some of the elements that we need to consider as we are having these conversations. And maybe a third element would be on the focus of the crime itself within its definition, which is on severe, widespread, and long-term damage to the environment. Again, what is left out is gradual damage to nature. So for example, drought that is going like really slowly, damaging nature. Sea level rise, and all these elements are really left out. Maybe another element to add is to just really appreciate, because I guess it's part of a struggle of environmental protection. As many panelists have said, it's not really there to cure everything, but at least from an advocacy and campaigning perspective, we can see some value even in the power of just the name Ecocide, the way it has brought so many stakeholders around one table to try to come up with solutions. But we might need to just really push a bit further when it comes to appreciating it in terms of legal terms. From an advocacy campaigning perspective, personally, I really see it working. And it can actually bring together social movements if we are thinking, for example, of a particular environmental harm committed in the Congo, in Kenya. And if we can have environmental justice movement in Kenya, Congo, in cooperation, for example, with those in France, those in the US, we can somehow like push them to use their domestic institutions against the particular perpetrators who might be corporations that are actually from those countries in the global north. But there are those elements that we have to look at as we consider this particular crime, but also to also just think outside the box. As I was mentioning earlier when we started, the push for ecocide has really been linked to the fight against the climate crisis. And at Amnesty International currently, we are still thinking, like everyone, how are we going to push for the conversation on ecocide? So what I'm really sharing is not an official position for Amnesty, but really just some thoughts that I and other colleagues have been gathering throughout the past months. So we're actually looking at it from the perspective of climate change adaptation, in the sense that the minute you destroy like a particular environment, you are somehow making a particular people, a particular community, vulnerable to adapt to the effects of climate change that are somehow affecting all of us today. And maybe now to get to the case study that I was to talk about, which is a case study in Madagascar during the colonial period. And for those of you who may remember, Madagascar was colonized by France. And the annexation started really in 1896. The annexation of Madagascar by France. And one of the strategies that the French colonial government was using at the time was to actually destroy nature as a way to use it for profit, but also to take local communities out of the forest that they depend on so that they can come and provide cheap labor in corporations that the French colonial power was installing throughout the Ireland state. And now for 2 decades, there was a particular problem that the French authorities had to contend with. There is a particular community in Madagascar known as the Antandroy people. They come from the Androy region in the southern part of Madagascar. So for those of you who know Madagascar, there is a severe drought in the southern part of Madagascar, and that situation did not start today. So this particular region of Madagascar has always been prone to chronic droughts that can happen every 3 years, every 4 years. This has been really happening. However, there was a particular vegetation, a vital vegetation of cactus, a very specific species that was resilient. It could really withstand the chronic droughts that were hitting this particular part of the country, such that whether there's drought or not, the Antandroy have food, they have water. In fact, many anthropologists refer to this particular vegetation as a water food plant, just because of the role that it was playing for the community. And now when the other element that it was doing, because it was really a spiny vegetation, and you had the Antandroy people living within the vegetation, making it hard for the French military to penetrate the vegetation so that they can colonize the Antandroy people. But now what the French government did, and this was under the administration of the French colonial governor, Marcel Olivier. So what they did was to manipulate a particular parasite, place it in canisters, and spread it across 40,000 hectares of this vital vegetation that was serving really an important role in terms of surviving the drought, surviving famine, surviving hunger for the Antandroy people. And 100 kilometers were disseminated every year. And within 5 years, from 1924 to 1929, all the vegetation was down. And now what happened is that the chronic drought hit again in the 1930s. But now the people, the Antandroy people, had already lost their ecological shield, if I can call it so, by this time. So they died in thousands, and many of them were constrained to just leave this Android region and go into internal displacement in other parts of the country. Yeah, but they're so attached to their land, so they've become now nomadic. So they never used to be nomadic. So whenever there is a chronic drought, it's like a signal that they have to leave the region and then come back because they're so much attached to their land to perform their traditional rituals. Yeah, now, recently, the drought has also been linked to global climate change now. But now that reality where it is leading us is that the Antandroy people were rendered vulnerable to adapt to climate change, which is worsening the drought in the region. And what we are trying to argue for is see if we can sustain that argument from a climate change adaptation angle, but then again, not just relying on the specific legal structures that we have in place. I guess one advantage that we have as Amnesty International is our presence in several countries. So in as much as we are in Madagascar, we also have presence in France and can see how to work with Amnesty France and see if we can somehow trigger some social movement, climate justice movement, to ask for reparations for the Antandroy people. Of course, we have very many legal barriers when it comes to ask for reparations for damages committed, atrocities committed under the colonial rule. Those who benefited from the colonial rule, and France in this particular case, usually argue that it was not illegal at the time to do whatever we did. Yeah, which is a view that is now being discredited in so many fora, showing that that was Eurocentric international law and is somehow a misnomer to refer to it as international law. Those acts were not sanctioned by nations, so to speak, at the time. So yeah, that's just the small contribution that I was going to add, and it was also just making me think about the capability, the individual capability that we are having within this conversation on ecocide. So for example, the French colonial governor, Marcel Olivier, like he died, I think, a century ago. So what do we do about this particular harm? Yeah, but then again, as I said at the beginning, it is a struggle and every effort counts, but it's just important for us to appreciate these issues within their complexity. Thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to the discussions continuing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nchiko. Thank you so much to our other panelists, Ms. Meta, Dr. Steve Akoth, and Dr. Kayuki Mwigua for setting the pace for this conversation. We invite questions from the audience. You can type them in the chat. Yes, I have a question directed to Ms. Meta and Prof. Mwigua. They had actually spoken about the right to development and nation states' rights to their own natural resources. And then my question would be, is prioritizing environmental protection at odds with African nations' right to development and, well, their right to also exploit their natural resources with regards to the extractive industry that Prof. Mwigua had talked about?
Who goes first?
Professor, after you.
Very well. The right to development is exemplified, also defined in several conventions, and it is. I did mention earlier that the Rio Declaration was very anthropocentric, and it holds in very high regard the right to development. But do you develop yourself to death? For example, if you're mining for gold and you're using mercury, then you're creating a new problem. If you're manufacturing and emitting something like sulfur plus H2O would be sulfuric acid, basically. Do you develop to kill yourself? So nobody is saying that Africa should not exploit its resources, but you do it in such a way that the generations of tomorrow are also able to live within that environment, especially with the scientific advances we have right now. Somebody asked me yesterday whether this whole business of environmentalism is a scam, in view of the fact that we have a new president who says he is not going to look at it somewhere in the world. It's not a scam. The thing is, if you have a whole forest and you cut it down, there are consequences. There is a ecosystem degradation, and that's major. So we must develop in such a way that we do not kill ourselves in the process of it. And yes, I agree, this movement looks like it's Eurocentric, but it's not. Conservation among the indigenous communities and within the traditional knowledge has been there for years and years and years. Maybe you don't find it in textbooks, but they'll tell you, mine this mineral this way, but do not degrade the environment. So the two are not incompatible, and there must be a balance between the two, what we do to the earth and the generations of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd love to come in there as well. I think what we're looking at is it's not so much a question of what exactly is taking place, it's how it's taking place, which is what the professor's just highlighted. It's also how much of it is happening. So scale in the context of a place, in terms of if you're effectively creating destruction on on an industrial scale. This is one of the biggest problems that we have in terms of the level of damage that we are now technologically capable of inflicting, but also where, in terms of, and this is hugely relevant in resource in the resource-rich regions like Africa, and that also contain the most important and richest biodiversity in certain areas, and also in some ways some of those fragile ecosystems as well. I think it's interesting in terms of development to look at where the world is going, and looking at if we're looking at a just transition, we also need to be looking at that from ecological perspective as well as the perspective of people and who it's going to affect, not least because the kinds of minerals that are potentially needed for a digital transition may also be we may also be looking at some very sensitive areas geographically in the world where those resources are concentrated, and so there needs to be a focus on what is safe, and we believe that is one of the aspects that that ecocide law brings into the mix. And as has been said by a couple of the speakers already, this law is not intended to cure all ills. It's not a miracle solution, but it does feel like a sort of necessary but not sufficient one, as in without putting in place something that that recognizes the reciprocity and the connection that we have and that we completely depend upon with our natural surroundings. We're destined to potentially, as the professor said, to develop ourselves to death. And I think that the cultural aspect that the professor brought in earlier, I think is also really, really important here, because there is something, I think criminal law has a particular access to the sort of ethical side of how we think about what is acceptable and not acceptable in our cultures, and that sense of, I suppose, in a way, what ecocide law has the potential to create or to begin to sort of create is a kind of taboo that in the global economic way of thinking, which often discounts this local knowledge and cultural knowledge, in that global economic way of thinking that has grown out of the European Western canon, there is no taboo around mass destruction of nature. We feel it around destruction of people, but we don't feel it around destruction of nature as a kind of global economic culture. And so it's really important that we start to reflect on the sort of morality and the ethics of what is happening when we tip that balance, out of its right place. And another aspect about another, I think, aspect that's really important from the cultural perspective, and that's actually been reflected, we believe, in the first time in this kind of context in the definition that has been proposed of ecocide at the International Criminal Court, is that it actually includes damage to cultural aspects of the environment as well as physical. So, for example, severe covers severe disruption or harm to natural resources, but also to cultural resources. And I think this is a kind of, I suppose what I'm feeling in the context of this conversation is that there's a kind of bridging function that potentially this recognition of ecocide could provide. It's something that can be inserted into the existing system, but that actually starts to move the systemic thinking in a new direction. And what's been very interesting for us as an organization is to see that for example, the foundations, often more radical ones that are interested in supporting this, are often those that are interested in system change and in social change, because they see the potential of inserting this rather specific piece that doesn't, as we say, that doesn't fix everything, but that names those worst harms as crimes, and in doing so has a kind of knock-on effect, you know, in a sort of cultural way. And I think that speaks to what Nchiko was saying about the power of the word as well, in terms of how that can galvanize support and understanding around it. I mean, as a professor and doctor will be well aware, you know, there are treaties that have actually sort of been on the shelf at the UN level that could potentially address transboundary harm, human rights violations, and ecological damage. But just I can't even remember the whole name of that of the treaty in question. Whereas when we talk about ecocide, there's something very concise and that has a sort of internal dynamic to it that I think is really powerful. And I mean, obviously, I've kind of rambled a little bit around the different aspects that we've been bringing up, but hopefully that sort of sheds a little bit more of a specific light on some of the things that we've been discussing.
Thank you so much, Prof. Migua and Ms. Meta, for your answers. Yes, to the audience, in case you have any questions, any clarifications or concerns, please type them in the chat. Yes, but as we anticipate questions from the audience, maybe a question to Mr. Nchiko would be, you earlier mentioned on biases by the International Criminal Court and then how they necessarily deal with African-based cases, if I could call them so. Could you kindly elaborate? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I keep on turning off my camera because my internet is not very stable. I mean, there was just a moment. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I apologize for that. Not long ago, there were cases of mass withdrawals, coordinated, I should say, from the African Union level, so to speak. African countries are threatening to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. Yeah, because until recently, the court was just targeting, particularly Africans. People who have been brought before the court were just Africans. And then we have I should say, evidence of similar serious crimes, similarly deserving crimes that have been committed elsewhere. We can think of Iraq, for example, but we know the potential perpetrators, but cases have not been initiated, cases have not been started. So I was just like alluding to that particular historical fact, I should say, and maybe even ongoing. Thank you.
I wonder if I could come back on that. Also, I'm not sure. Certainly, I can't see the audience chat, and I wonder whether it's not enabled. I wonder if the audience might like to put questions in the Q&A box at the bottom if you're having trouble using the chat. In regard to the ICC, yes, I can completely appreciate what Nchiko has just brought up. There's an interesting we feel an interesting rebalancing potential with the addition of ecocide to the list of crimes, in the sense that, because, as you pointed out, indeed, that the focus of the ICC is on individual responsibility of actual persons, of natural persons, rather than legal persons or governments. There is, of course, the possibility that this can apply to, for example, corporate executives or boards of directors, for example. And what we often find is that while ecocidal activity may be carried out in developing countries, in so-called producer countries, often the decisions that lead to the harmful activities, which may indeed, as many of the worst harms are, may indeed already be in breach of certain laws. The decisions that lead to those are often made in the wealthy north. So there is the potential, we believe, with ecocide law to restore a certain balance there. And also, I think there's a sense that with ecocide, you have a slightly different situation to with the other international crimes. So when you're looking at crimes against humanity or war crimes, the likelihood is that the state where this activity is taking place is unlikely, almost by definition, to prosecute. And therefore, the situation is referred to the court of last resort, which is the International Criminal Court, because the way that it's set up is it's intended to be complementary. But because in the case of ecocide, we're largely talking about corporate activity, we believe that there is more potential for this crime to be addressed either in the relevant state or in another state that has ratified the crime and that has a connection to the case, or that potentially is applying universal jurisdiction principles. Because, of course, the ICC cannot possibly deal with all cases of all crimes which the Rome Statute covers. It's intended to sit in complementarity with national jurisdictions. And we believe that in the case of ecocide, that structure is more likely to be employed in its intended way, so that ecocide cases will ultimately likely be taken in national jurisdictions, unless they apply to a situation where the state cannot or won't prosecute. So while there is certainly justification to looking at the ICC as an institution that is born out of Eurocentric values and discussions, it's nonetheless it's actually, it's the only mechanism internationally that can hold individuals criminally accountable beyond borders. And so it's very important in that way. And the other thing I would come back to is that it is actually separate from the UN. So it's not actually bound by the UN Security Council, and there is no veto in the same way that there is at the UN. So while it was originally a UN project, it actually is independent. And for example, the US, Russia, and China are not actually members. Now, that has pros and cons of its own. But one of the advantages is that those countries don't actually have a vote as to whether ecocide becomes a crime at the International Criminal Court.
May I add on to something here? We are not thinking of everybody being taken to The Hague. No. The way it works is this. We have countries domesticating the Rome Statute. And in this case, they will be domesticating the expanded one with ecocide there, and place it within their constitutions, and place it within their law. So the ecocide then will be criminalized, even at the local level. So you don't have to ship somebody to The Hague. No, the government, which is in charge of licensing, in charge of criminal law, in charge of enforcing the constitution, will get you at that level. So if we have a proper definition out there, acceptability out there, then you domesticate it. I think there's a likelihood that it will bite at the local level across all the countries. And where they do not subscribe or domesticate the Rome Statute, there are other principles. For example, just the other day, the right to a clean and healthy environment became a recognized human right across the UN nations, all of them. And that is already appearing in certain constitutions, including the Kenyan Constitution, Article 42, Article 69, 42, 69, 71. You can sue someone, including the government itself, and protect the environment. So I see it cascading to national constitutions, national legislations, and the consciousness of the people themselves. And if it's accepted at that level, we'll have done something. But the starting point, we are saying, recognize it at the international level. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your answers. We have 3 questions from the audience. So Rugenge Onchiko is asking, under the proposed amendments to the Rome Statute, the legal definition of ecocide is unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. This definition requires acts committed with knowledge equating to mens rea of the offender, and those actions must be severe and long-term. According to me, this threshold is very high and more likely impossible to meet. My question is, are we not creating another crime similar to genocide and almost impossible to prosecute? I believe Ms. Meta can answer to that. And then secondly, Ms. Melissa Mungai is asking, could the panelists say something on how their activism or intellectual frameworks center women or position them? I'm a recent convert of Vandana Shiva and Maria Maya's concept of ecofeminism that suggests women, particularly in the global south, are the main partners in sustaining nature, perhaps because they bear the most when nature is destroyed and their special knowledges on nurturing nature. Does this align with your positions somehow? I believe that can be answered by all our panelists. And Mosoti Arunga asks, Ecocide International aims to establish ecocide laws. Prof. Kariuki has given examples of a conservation based on beliefs, norms resident in cultures for centuries, especially in Africa. He's asking where the balance is. And finally, Rugenge Wanchiko is asking, with regards to the selectivity of the ICC targeting African nations, which has led to alternative solution by African states, the Malabo Protocol, well, the protocol has expanded its scope of international criminal jurisdiction under Article 28A, and none of the crimes under the Malabo Protocol include ecocide. What are your thoughts on that? So, Ms. Meta can answer the first question. Second question can be addressed by all our panelists. The third, well, Ms. Meta would have to answer that, but all our panelists can chip in. And finally, yes, all our panelists can answer the final question on the Malabo Protocol. Thank you. We'll start with Prof. Wigo.
All right. Let me answer my part. I'm a feminist myself, and I don't just speak it, I put it on paper. I believe there cannot be sustainable development if you do not involve men and women equally. There cannot be any peace building unless you ask the women, what do you think? Because they interact with nature at a very practical level. So you cannot leave them behind. And I have a series of papers. Maybe I will do a book now on how women should be involved in sustainable development. You can't have peace building, you cannot have peacekeeping, you cannot have development without their inputs, because they have something to say. They have memories to keep. They have knowledge that they have that is peculiar to them. I had a grandmother as I was growing up who was so intelligent in terms of eco-knowledge that she could get a PhD, but under her system, they couldn't give her because that was deemed to be traditional knowledge. So we are thinking about upscaling and mainstreaming this ecological knowledge into the mainstream. We are already doing that in Kenya and writing it into the statute itself, writing it into the constitution, linking it with science and making it work. Remember, I did say that the Rome Statute will be manifested in local statutes and the constitution itself. So it will carry with it those norms and practices, and it will be accompanied by a lot of awareness and education so that there's acceptance, because as a law is as strong as its effectiveness or acceptability by the local people. Well, Malabo Protocol, I think is you can never finally run away from those offenses. We are simply saying, if we put in this new ecocide law at the international level, jurisprudence will grow and develop, and there will be acceptability across nations on the need to protect the environment, which we have for very many years taken for granted. But now, environment itself has its own rights, and that jurisprudence is growing. What are the rights of the environment itself? And I think it's the Rome Statute would be a good starting point. It's one word, ecocide. Very similar, it rhymes with genocide. We are naming it. And it's a good starting point. Not a panacea, not a solution, but a good starting point. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Kariuki. Dr. Steve Akoth, you're welcome.
Dr. Steve Akoth is no longer with us.
My bad. We will have Nchiko and Ms. Mata. Thank you.
Yes, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, maybe I can go to one of the general questions, which is yeah, the one by Mwalimu Melissa, keeping us to account for the place of women in our activism and everything that we do. Perhaps you can just allow me to stick to the case study that I was called upon to present. But basically, in terms of research, campaign, and advocacy that we do as an organization, we center intersectionality. And this is really to look at the disproportionate impact, or like the particular impact that a particular situation, human rights violation, atrocities are having on different segments of the population. But now the issue with the case study that I was looking at, I was speaking of an event that started in 1930. So what has been happening since then has been displacement every time there is a chronic drought, and that has happened 15 times so far, the latest one being in 2021. One major issue has been the issue of data collection. So there's just not been any data for us to know the particular situations of the people who are being affected, the particular needs of specific groups, men, women, children, persons with disabilities. We have not really had that data. In fact, the case of the Antandroy came to the attention of the international community in the late 1990s, with the WFP, I think, making its first intervention in the country in 2003. And data collection only started in 2009. And what I have observed and documented so far has been that there is the absence of the government, the Malagasy government itself, to attend to this particular issue. Be it colonial reparations from France, these have never been there. And if we are to speak even of climate change, because climate change is also a contributing factor, Madagascar has not had access to the funds that are available to attend to the particular needs of particular people who are being affected. And we can place women there. And now, even the data that we have so far from IOM is not disaggregated. So we don't know the specific needs of women, the specific needs of children, the specific needs of particular groups that we are dealing with. And this can really feed in the structures of climate change governance as well. Because again, even the money that we've been asking from global North countries since 2009 was not based on any needs assessment. So it really like fits into that complex framework of global climate change governance. But from the interviews that I've conducted, what really like came up was that when the Antandroy people are to move because of the severe drought, a decision has to be made at a family level because the state is not there to support. People who are responsible, countries that are responsible are not there to support. And the decision is usually made as follows. The society is patriarchal. So men have to go into displacement. And how do they go into displacement? They have to sell the land that is being rendered over substandard quality by the increasing drought, or they have to sell cattle. And now as they leave women with limited resources. And women are to deal with children as well. Again, from the research that we've done in this region of Madagascar, the Android region, what we've documented has been the fact that women are really experiencing a disproportionate impact when it comes to this, because they're the ones to make the decision that I'm going to eat once in 3 days so that my kids can eat. So that problem has been there. The other issue has been with humanitarian aid. So we have a huge flow of humanitarian actors acting in the region. But in many instances, because the Antandroy people survive on agriculture and cattle herding, but the humanitarian aid that is coming is not speaking to these particular points that go to the core of the livelihood of the Antandroy people. So again, even to allow women to play the particular role, their leading role in society is not also being allowed. This is for women who have been left at the point of departure. But then again, what we've documented is that if women are to leave, children are left with old persons. So again, even children also, now you can just really like picture how the situation is really dire. Now, when the women leave, and it's not just women, it's women, men, and everyone who is able to leave, we've left behind some women, children, old persons, and persons with disabilities. So all these actors are not being attended to. So now as they leave, the Malagasy government has no plan to manage this particular displacement. That was triggered by a colonial wrong. So there's no demand for reparations for colonialism, for example. And it has been making demand for climate change, at least, if we are to speak of responsibility when it comes to climate change. But then again, in interviews that we've done with government officials, the country has not had access to any of the global funds that have been established. And then again, you can see there's no even like need to start like doing the need assessment of these particular people. What are the particular interests of women? What are the particular interests of men, of specific groups that are there? So all these elements have been missing. Now, in the absence of a plan, when they move to another part of the country, they face evictions. Because again, the government is relying on a law of 1960, which says that if you settle, for example, in a national park, you are to be evicted without any particular notice. So again, maybe to just answer Melissa, I think women are there, and it's actually a fact that women are more industrious in the Android region than men are. But it's just that there's no structure, there's no support that they're being provided with so that they can really, really act. But their role is there, is very visible, but they're really taking the most when it comes to this particular violation or wrong, if we can put it that way. There was a question by Rugenge. I don't know who is taking that, but it's just like something that I'm also thinking about, because it actually goes to a point that I was raising the other day. And I was like, if we are not careful, Ecocide might actually be a distraction. Because again, just put yourself in the shoes of a corporate entity that knows the bureaucracy that you'll have to go through for you to prove my mens rea of this particular crime. And when we just look at the time value of money, it's like when I just compare profits, this is a risk that I'm willing to take as a corporate actor. Yeah, anyway, I think I can stop there and let other panelists to come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nchiko. Ms. Meta, you're welcome.
Thank you. I would probably respond immediately on the issue that Nchiko was just talking about. The additional consideration, of course, for corporations is the personal criminal responsibility. That actually has a potential direct knock-on effect for the public relations of the company for which the person works, which is something the professor brought up earlier, and of course for the personal freedom and reputation of the individual. And that is something that is genuinely scary and something that corporate executives want to avoid in a way that breaching regulation is never going to be. If your company is fined, that's one thing. But if you're actually, you have the criminal tap on the shoulder, it's a very different effect, both on your own reputation, but also that of your company. And therefore, of course, potentially on the stock value as well of your company. So So I think there is an additional, there is something very much worthwhile there. To respond to the definition issue, are we creating something that has too high a bar to prosecute? There is a difference here between the ecocide definition and the genocide definition. So the genocide definition is indeed a very high bar, and the mens rea with in other words, the state of mind factor with genocide is has to be very intentional. It has to be that you have to show that somebody has intended to destroy a people in whole or in part. Now, actually, the way that the ecocide definition has been drafted is not the same. It actually relies on a level of knowledge of the likelihood of risk. So it's more about a kind of recklessness standard. And so and this is partly because with the situation with ecological destruction, generally speaking, perpetrators don't set out with the intention to destroy the environment. They set out with the intention to potentially, to make a profit in whatever given area that they're working in. And so it's more about the fact that they knew that there was a risk of severe and widespread harm, and they went ahead with that action anyway. So, we do feel that there is a difference there in those thresholds that's actually quite important. And the Rome Statute does allow for differences in the mens rea to be established within a particular crime, which is exactly what, with genocide, it was made higher. With ecocide, it would actually be made slightly lower. But I think it's also important to say, to reiterate that this, and this speaks to the later question here around this is Masoti Arunga's question around establishment of ecocide laws, and how does that balance with conservation based on beliefs and norms of people resident in cultures that have been working on conservation for centuries. We would say that those two are very much not mutually exclusive. They can be mutually reinforcing, and I think this is really an important aspect that ecocide law brings in an additional factor which speaks directly to those who are within the culture that is creating the problem, if you see what I mean. So that law addresses them, but it also supports and reflects that much more embedded conservation knowledge that has been there for centuries around the respect and balance with Mother Nature. So we feel that that's quite important. In terms of, just briefly on the question on women, there have been some brilliant points raised already, but I will simply remark that it's interesting that the ecocide law movement is not exclusively by any means, but it has been a very female-led movement. And this is, I think it's, I would dare to say that perhaps that isn't a coincidence. Thank you.
May I say something about mens rea? Mens rea is not really what you are thinking. It includes recklessness. So if you fire an AK-47 into some buildings, you have the mens rea for murder. In environmental law, we've gone a step further. There are a lot of crimes of strict liability. We will not ask you, why did you pour mercury or cyanide into the river? Strict liability. It gets you as a person, and it's up to you to explain, if at all you're explaining. So there'll be offenses of strict liability. There will be a wide definition of mens rea to include recklessness against the environment itself. So we'll still get you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists for their contributions, and I believe that all your questions have been addressed. Yes, for the interest of time, I would like to welcome Nabintu and Chico Letitia for her remarks. And then thereafter, Mr. Humphrey Sipala, the editor-in-chief of the Kabarak University Press, will also address this. Thank you.
I think it's Mr. Sipala first, then I'll come later.
All right, welcome, Mr. Sipala.
Thank you, Esther Blessing. Thank you, Nabintu. Thank you so much to our panelists, Jojo Meta, Prof. Migwa, Dr. Akoth, thank you for this. And Chico, Anon Chico and Chico, certainly, thank you for this very exciting conversation. I think insightful, gone deep into some ideas. My name is Humphrey Sipala, I should have said there. Editor-in-Chief, Kabrak University Press. The Kabrak University Press, we've been hosting conversations on faith and environment for about 2 years now. And our thought has been from the very beginning that faith values drive environmental protection. And the poor knowledge about that is central in, the poor understanding, poor acceptance of environmental protection rules. And so there's the thesis that we have is the idea that the more we are alive to the fact that our faith values drive our beliefs about environmental protection, the more we engage in them. I think the examples given by Dr. Akoth on the Kaya forests and the Dongo Kundu bypass in Mombasa is an excellent example. You don't need to be paid. You don't need to be moved by government. In fact, many times government is wondering how to stop the local communities from driving their activism because they feel deeply their connection to the Kaya forest, for instance, and how they want to ensure that they are protected, or the fig tree that he spoke of. In I think July 2022, we had, I think, among the earliest of the conversations we had on this faith and environment project that we've been having. And the director of Faith for Earth Coalition at UNEP, Dr. Iyad Bimogli, gave us the example of an initiative he knew of in the 80s. I think anyone who knows about fishing in the coral reefs in the 80s in the East African coast would know that there was a lot of use of dynamite to blow up coral reefs to fish. And government had tried all sorts of ways to speak to fishermen in Zanzibar. Carrot stick, both one after the other, didn't work. And then someone said, let's tell them about the faith angle. And the civic education, the environmental awareness was done by imams, and they came and said, the Quran and Allah is clear about the very rules about how to protect the environment. And they said, whoa, it's wrong by faith. And they stopped. Yes, I mean, it doesn't always go entirely, but huge movement, behavior change was done. And I think that's why it's important to also take cognizance of, the structural elements that Mchiko has been speaking to. I'm usually perturbed, for instance, about the example of if we have an event at church or at the mosque, do we buy those single-use plastic bottles so that we can have water to drink? Is there any other way a small church parish could do any differently if we didn't confront the structural systems that make it cheaper for water to be provided, by single-use plastics? And so the need for us to keep this study, to keep alive the knowledge that our faith values drive environmental conservation, and that therefore it is not foreign to us, and that there's a long tradition. I think it's always been useful. It's been the drive of our ethos at Kabrak University Press's Faith and Environment Project, and we are honored that we've had such an excellent panel to discuss this angle of ecocide so deeply. We're honored about this. We run a blog called Faith and Environment blog on the university website. We want to continue being a platform where these conversations can be had. So we welcome the panelists, as well as our audience and anybody else to share their views, their experiences, traditional views on faith and environment, but also the mainstream religions as may have or have not been imported from Africa, depending on the conversations that we may have. I just thought as I close, just one quick comment, and I think it would be useful to mention this. Before I became a full-time university teacher, I used to sit in some conversations around the Malabo Protocol. that is the protocol to the African charters, African courts. There have been quite a number of protocols to the African Court Protocol of the African Charter, but the Malabo Protocol is a 2014 protocol that was adding the international criminal element. And one of the most important things to note about this was at the time when this was happening, and I think Chiko alluded to this, there was a lot of discontent at the state level in Africa about the ICC targeting Africans. I distinctly recall one of the strongest conversations at the civil society level we were having was about how the environmental crimes in the Malabo Protocol should be one of the ways in which we advance the need for African states to ratify the Malabo Protocol and say, look, yes, you may have issues with the West about the crime of aggression and the crimes against humanity and all of that, but surely Malabo Protocol has clear crimes on trafficking in transboundary harmful waste and I'm trying to remember the other one, and the exploitation of natural resources, and so there is a long tradition. One would recall the NMOD Treaty and also AP1 of the Vienna Conventions that came precisely after the US Army tried to destroy the Vietnamese forest in its fight against the Viet Cong, Vietnam War. So one more addition, I think I find it fascinating, and that the more we prohibit by law the structural behaviors that make the destruction of the environment possible, the more we build this value in society that Jojo Mehta spoke of, that it is wrong to practice business, to practice war, to practice our daily lives in a manner that does not preserve the environment for the future. I think we're excited about this again. I am very thankful to the panelists. Again, invite conversations also on our blog. Thank you very much. It's always a blessing and an honor to have you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Sipala, and thank you all. I think everything has been said. Kabara Faith and Environment is a project that is growing every day. This is because of your commitment and support. This webinar actually marks the last webinar of the year. We have been exploring how African philosophy, especially indigenous people, can help solve this problem of climate change. And yeah, you will find all our videos on Kabu Press channel on YouTube, all of them, and this one will be uploaded, I think, by tomorrow. We will have this one online too. Also, I think this is also an opportunity to ask for collaboration, if any, actually. If there is, also, we will even contact some of you. Thank you so much to Mr. Sipala. Okay, Prof. Kariuki.
Well, in terms of collaborations, I just wanted to say one thing. This is the press talking to us. My books are online, all of them. My articles, from the first one to the one I wrote yesterday, are online. Feel free to use them. Feel free to print them. Feel free to disseminate among your students. And feel free to print any article so long as you reproduce my name at the beginning. And that is my contribution to it. I don't print hard copies of the books I have behind me. Those are my books. But I no longer print hard copies. But you can have the soft copies, all of them, on all the subjects that I have written on. If you feel there's a book you must print, let me know. Print it, but don't sell it to the students. I don't sell books. Not even one, not even one. I haven't made a shilling out of selling books. Thank you.
Yes, I was saying also this is an opportunity to reach out for possible collaboration on this problem of environment, which is a global security threat for all of us. Thank you so much. Back to you, Esther.
Thank you so much. I'd like to start by thanking our panelists, Ms. Jojo Meta, Mr. Nchiko, Dr. Steve Akoth in his absentia, and Prof. Mwigwa. Additionally, thank you, Prof. Mwigwa, for the opportunity to grow our home libraries. And then further, I would also like to thank the audience for being present today, for your questions and for your contribution. It has been a timely conversation we're having, yes, taking into consideration that the ICJ sits in December to actually continue this conversation. So yes, stay locked in. And then finally, I would like to thank our technical team for being ever present in facilitating this. And oh, and Chico is saying, sorry, his hand wasn't up. He would like to clap. Okay, then, yes. And finally, one last short parting shot would be the environment is the biggest civilian, well, essentially. But then, as opposed to the textbook term of a civilian, it actually continues to be impacted and negatively, even in times of peace. So that's something to think about. And with that, have a wonderful evening and see you again next year. Goodbye.
Thank you.